The next subunit is 1.7 Internal Audit Ethics Competency. The question number 1, there are 7 questions in this subunit. During the course of an engagement, an internal auditor discovers that a clerk is embezzling funds from the organization. Okay, he's stealing. Although this is the first embezzlement ever encountered and the organization has a security department, the internal auditor decides to interrogate the suspect. Interrogate. Do we have the mandate? Do we have the authority to do that? That depends upon the internal audit charter. If the internal auditor is violating, the IA Code of Ethics, the rule violated is most likely failing to exercise due diligence. The due diligence means using good judgment. There is no judgment involved in this. A is incorrect. Lack of loyalty to the organization. There is nothing in the situation that shows that the auditor had some lack of loyalty to the organization. B is incorrect as well. C, lack of competence in this area. Internal auditors are not fraud experts and we are not investigative experts. So we do not have the knowledge and skills of investigators. So this is something beyond my competency. I cannot do that, and this don't have the authority and nor do I have the skill to interrogate the suspect. So C, in fact, is the correct answer. Failing to comply with the law. The IA Code of Ethics rule of, we are talking specifically about the rule. We have the 4 principles, ethics codes. Failing to comply with the law, we might have failed with complying with the law because we do not have the right to interrogate. Only the security department or the external policing department is responsible for the job. So it could be, but again we are looking only from the perspective of the Code of Ethics. So D again is not a correct option. Next. An organization has recently placed a former operating manager in the position of Chief Audit Executive. That could be an issue. The new Chief Audit Executive is not a member of the Institute of Internal Auditors and is not a CIA. Henceforth, the internal audit activity will be run strictly by the Chief Audit Executive standards, not the IIAs. Again, this is something not acceptable. All 4 staff internal auditors are members of the Institute of Internal Auditors, but they are not CIAs. According to the IAA Code of Ethics, what is the best course of action for the staff internal audit? I think we have done this question before. The code does not apply because they are not CIAs. No. Since they are the members, the code is applicable to them. Incorrect. They should comply with the internal national standard for the professional practice of internal auditing. That's correct. Since they are the member of the Institute of Internal Audit, members and qualified CIAs must follow the standards which were previously called international standards for the professional practice of internal auditing. C, why not C? They must respect the legitimate and ethical objective of the organization and ignore the standards. You can't ignore the standards. And they must resign their jobs to avoid improper activities. Resigning is the last resort when you're unable to solve the problem or the dilemma you find yourself in. Incorrect. Next question. A new staff internal auditor was told to perform an engagement in an area with which the internal auditor was not familiar. Because of time constraints, no supervision was provided. The assignment presented a good learning experience, but the area was clearly beyond the internal auditor's competence. Clearly, competence principle is violated. Nonetheless, the internal auditor prepared comprehensive working papers and communicated the results to the management. In this situation, the internal auditor activity violated the standards by hiring an internal auditor without proficiency in this area. The issue is not with the hiring, because if you might hire an inexperienced CIA, but it's the responsibility of the Chief Audit Executive and the Internal Audit Department management to provide training. So A is not an issue. The internal audit activity means the Internal Audit Department violated these standards by not providing adequate supervision. That's the problem. Since the individual internal auditor was not expert and proficient in that area, so supervision was needed. That's the violation. The chief audit executive has not violated the code of ethics because it does not address supervision. Code requires compliance with the standards, and standards require that the chief audit executive should provide appropriate training and supervision to the staff auditors. So this is incorrect. The standards and the Institute of Internal Auditors Code of Ethics were followed by internal audit. No, they were not followed. Standards were not followed. Standards require internal audit department's head and the manager audit to provide for appropriate supervision and training. Next question. Internal auditors who fail to maintain their proficiency through a continuing education could be found to be in violation of those CIAs who do not keep their knowledge updated. They are in fact violation of what? A. The international standards for professional practice of internal auditing. Question is, internal auditor who fail to maintain their proficiency through continuing education could be found to be in violation of what? A. The international standards for the professional practice of internal auditing. Okay, it could be, but what we have learned in our principle of competency, that internal auditor should regularly update their knowledge, their skills, their proficiency, and their effectiveness and quality of their services. So just ruling out international standards on auditing and omitting totally the element competency is not correct. Next, the IA Code of Ethics. Yes. So in fact, the internal auditor has violated the ethics and standards. So let us find out an option that carries them both. C. International Standard for the Professional Practice of Internal Auditing and the IA Code of Ethics, both have been violated. Which of the following most likely constitutes a violation of the IA Code of Ethics? Auditor A has accepted an assignment to perform an engagement at the Electronics Manufacturing Division. Okay. Auditor A has recently joined the internal audit activity, but Auditor A was senior auditor for external audit of that division and has audited many electronics organizations during their past years. Fine, he is expert on it. There is no issue. He has accepted an assignment for which he has the competency. No violation here. No violation. No professional conflict, and there is no issue of competency. And since he is auditing that department after 2 years of appointment, so there is no issue of conflict of interest, and moreover he has the expertise on that area. B. Auditor B has been assigned to perform an engagement at the warehouse function 6 months from now. Auditor B has no expertise in the area but accepted the assignment anyway. Auditor B has signed up for continuing professional education courses in warehousing that will be completed before the assignment begins. Perfectly fine, because we have taken up an assignment for which you don't have the skill, warehousing skills, but you have signed up for the training of this weakness, and by the time the assignment begins you would have got the training, so there is nothing wrong with it. We have made the arrangement. C. Auditor C is content as an internal auditor. He is happy that I am the internal auditor and has come to look at it as a regular 9 to 5 job. Auditor C has not engaged in continuing professional education or other activities to improve effectiveness during the last 3 years. However, Auditor C feels performance of quality work is the same as before. So just feeling that you're doing okay and you don't go sign up for any continuing professional education, again it's a violation of the IA Code of Ethics. Competency, incorrect. So this is a violation apparently. D. Auditor D discovers an internal financial fraud during the year. The books were adjusted to properly reflect the loss associated with the fraud. Auditor D discussed the fraud with the external auditor when the external auditor reviewing working papers detailing the incident. So there was the fraud that you discovered in the financial statements. The books were adjusted to properly reflect the loss associated with the fraud. Auditor D discussed, the fraud was discovered books were adjusted to properly reflect the loss associated with the fraud. फर्स्ट क्लास आगे कहीं होगा. Fraud with the external auditor when the external auditor reviewed the working paper. Now here is something I'm little confused about, because you discovered a fraud and you discussed the issue with the external auditor, because internal external auditor, they are in the same domain. Since the books were adjusted, so the loss has been identified and has been properly recorded, and it has been discussed with the external auditor, so I think there is nothing wrong that I didn't report. So there is nothing wrong, no violation here, no violation here. Next we have the second last question in this area. Under the IAE Code of Ethics, an entity that provides internal auditing services is specifically required to do what? An entity outsourcing service that provides internal auditing services is specifically required to maintain certain predetermined staffing requirement for engagements. Code doesn't require such terms that the number of staff member in consulting and assurance should be in these proportions. There is no such mentioning. A is not the correct option. And moreover, the staffing requirements are determined by each engagement, so they are not set by the ethical code. Internal auditing services providing companies specifically required to comply with the international standard for the professional practice of internal auditing. Yes, you must follow these standards. That's the correct option. Comply with the organizational policy. Code doesn't require that. Participate in a formal continuing education program. Yes, that's objectionable. The internal auditors need to regularly update their skills and knowledge. But the word continual education program, the exact wording or such exact requirements are not mentioned either in the standards or in the principles of code. So it says the code requires compliance with the standards, and the standards require internal auditors to enhance their knowledge, skills and other competencies through continuing professional education. But neither the code nor the standards require the word formal at continuing education. Formal word. Informal updation of your knowledge. The word is continuing professional education, not the formal continuing education like graduation and master. So that's why it's incorrect. The last question for the subsection 1.7. Why does the IAE Code of Ethics in Rule of Conduct 4.2 competence requires that due professional care be used in obtaining information to support an engagement opinion? Sufficient, reliable, relevant and useful information lends credibility to the opinion. That's a very correct option. Sufficient in quantity that you reach the same conclusion as I do. Reliable, the information that can be depended upon. Relevant related to the engagement, and useful information lends credibility to the opinion. Absolutely correct option. To preclude any conflict of interest. Preclude means to prevent, prohibit. This conflict of interest has been covered in the rule 2.1. So this is not covered under the competency principle 4 or 4.2. So in fact that's why this is not correct. To require honesty in performing work. Under competency, we do not see any word honesty. This is again incorrect. It is covered under the Rule of Conduct 1.1. We don't need to remember these 1.1. Actually, these are his publisher's own questions. So we just need to know those 4 principles and how they're covered. D. If internal auditors were permitted to communicate engagement results without obtaining sufficient information, they would be in a position to accept fee or gift from engagement clients. Okay, what it says, if internal auditors were permitted, if they are allowed to communicate engagement results without obtaining sufficient information, they would be in a position to accept fee or gifts from engagement clients. Again, this is the issue of objectivity. It is not covered under competency. So this conflict of interest area is not covered under competency. That's why the area under competency, the covered under competency, is only A. So that's why D is not the correct option. So it ends your subunit 1.7.